Before I ever learned to hide the bruises, I learned to hide the fear. Fear shows in your eyes, in the way you breathe, in the way your shoulders curl inward as if you're trying to disappear. People notice fear long before they notice a swollen cheek or a split lip, so I learned early to smile with my teeth but not my heart, to laugh softly so no one heard the tremble beneath it. I became a master of, "I'm fine," the most universal lie a woman in my position could tell. My husband, Evan, had once been gentle. Or perhaps he had only pretended to be, and I was too in love to see the mask slipping. Our marriage started with promises of forever, whispered plans, and late-night kisses that made me believe I had chosen the right man. He brought me flowers on Fridays, held my hand in grocery stores, and told me he couldn't fall asleep unless I was beside him. Those were the days I replayed in my head like a broken lullaby, trying to figure out where I went wrong. The first time he hit me, it wasn't even during an argument. He had come home irritated from work, complaining about his boss and the traffic and the weather. I stood behind him while he ranted, trying to rub the tension out of his shoulders, when suddenly he turned and slapped me. The sound echoed louder than the pain. I stood frozen, more shocked than hurt. He apologized immediately, crying, begging, swearing it was stress, swearing it would never happen again. I wanted to believe him, so I did. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it then. As weeks turned into months, the violence came like thunderstorms, sudden, intense, and always followed by calm. A new perfume bottle going unused was enough to set him off. A forgotten grocery item. A question he didn't like. A tone he imagined. Even silence could be an offense. "I don't like the way you're looking at me," he once said before shoving me against the hallway wall. It didn't matter how I looked, how I spoke, how gentle I tried to be. His anger was a beast that lived outside reason. And I learned to adjust myself around his moods, shrinking and folding and bending until I barely recognized the girl I once was. To the outside world, we were perfect. I wore makeup every morning, not out of vanity but survival. A dab of concealer under the left eye. A sweep of foundation across the cheekbone. Sometimes I added earrings or curled my hair, not because I felt beautiful, but because distraction was easier than explanation. Long sleeves became my uniform. Even in summer, when the air clung thick and hot, I wore them like armor. When friends asked why I dressed so modestly, I laughed and said, "I get cold easily." When my mother suggested a tank top once, I pretended I didn't like the style. People rarely dig into the lies you present them. Truth is heavy, and most prefer to carry something lighter. The nights were the worst. Lying next to Evan felt like sleeping beside a ticking bomb. If his breathing changed, I held mine. If he shifted, I forced my body to stay perfectly still. Sometimes, I lay awake until dawn, afraid that falling asleep might leave me vulnerable when he woke. Fear became my lullaby. Exhaustion became my shadow. And then came the night that changed everything. The argument began with the burnt rice. Ridiculous, really. Something so small for a disaster so large. Evan shouted that I was useless, worthless. That everything I touched turned to ash. The pot wasn't even ruined, just browned at the bottom. But his anger was already looking for a place to land. This time it landed harder than ever. His fist connected with my jaw. My vision blurred. The kitchen tiles swayed beneath my feet. I tried to grab the counter, but the world dissolved into a ringing silence. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, cold and weightless, as if my body had turned into a shadow. Then everything went black, and that darkness became the doorway to a new beginning I never saw coming. When I finally drifted back into consciousness, I was no longer on the kitchen floor. The sharp scent of antiseptic hit me first, cooling my lungs with every shallow breath. Harsh white lights glared down, blurring and sharpening in waves as my eyes struggled to focus. I was in a hospital. Evan's voice filled the room before I could fully understand where I was. "She fell down the stairs," he repeated to the nurse, his tone threaded with urgency and a kind of frustrated desperation. "I told her to be careful. She's always tripping. She's clumsy like that." His hand was on my shoulder, not gentle, possessive, claiming me as much as claiming the lie. I blinked slowly, my mind floating somewhere between awareness and fog. My head throbbed. My cheek pulsed. Every breath scraped against my ribs like sandpaper. But the worst pain was the heaviness in my chest, a dread that hadn't left me since the night I married him. The nurse nodded politely, though her eyes flickered over my injuries with quiet suspicion. "We'll have the doctor take a look." When she left, Evan leaned down, forcing his face into my blurry field of vision. His expression was tight, strained, fearful, but not of me, of the consequences. "You're fine," he whispered sharply. "Just stick to the story." "Understand?" I didn't respond. My tongue felt like lead in my mouth. But that didn't matter. Fear keeps you silent even when you want to scream. A few minutes later, the door opened, and the doctor stepped in. That was when everything changed. The moment his eyes landed on me, he stopped walking. His posture stiffened. Just slightly, but enough for me to notice. His gaze traveled from my swollen eye to the bruises on my wrists, to the faint fingerprint-shaped marks blooming purple along my neck. His jaw tightened. He knew. And not just because the injuries contradicted Evan's flimsy story. He recognized me. Months earlier, I had come to this same emergency room with a cut on my scalp and a bruise the size of a fist on my ribs. I'd told him I fell from a ladder. He didn't believe me then either, but he respected my trembling insistence. He treated me gently, his hands steady, his eyes soft with unspoken understanding. Now, seeing me again, more broken, more afraid, something inside him hardened. Evan began repeating the staircase lie for the third time. She fell. The doctor raised a hand, silencing him without even looking his way. "That's strange," he said, his voice calm, clinical. "Because the injury patterns don't match a fall." Evan's eyes snapped to him. "What's that supposed to mean?" The doctor moved closer, examining the bruise along my jaw with the lightest touch. "A fall typically results in linear, sliding impact injuries. Your wife," he said, glancing briefly at Evan, "has distinct, repeated blunt, force trauma marks. These are defensive wounds." Evan's mouth twisted. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm stating medical facts," the doctor replied. The room thickened with tension. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Evan's hand tightened around the railing of my bed. Meanwhile, the doctor subtly turned his head, catching the eye of a nurse passing by the door. He gave a small, coded signal, one I didn't understand then, but would later realize meant get security. He continued to examine me, but now he directed his questions only toward me. "Do you feel dizzy?" he asked, though his meaning was deeper. "Any nausea? Any pain when breathing?" I understood in some quiet, fragile way that these were safe questions, but also test questions. He was looking for signs not just of injury, but of willingness. Could I answer honestly? Could I speak? Could I trust him? I tried to part my lips, but no sound came out. Fear pressed a hand over my voice. The doctor didn't push. He simply nodded, a softness returning to his expression. "You need to stay overnight for observation," he said firmly. "She doesn't need to stay," Evan interrupted quickly. "I can take her home. I'll watch her myself." The doctor didn't look at him. "She stays." Two security officers appeared near the doorway, standing back, not causing a scene but unmistakably present. Evan saw them, his entire demeanor changed. He backed off, forcing a tight, brittle smile. "Fine," he said. "If the doctor insists." He leaned down as if to kiss my forehead, but I flinched involuntarily. His smile cracked for half a second, rage slipping through, before he masked it. He walked out of the room, leaving behind a trail of tension that finally broke once the door shut. The doctor pulled a stool beside my bed and lowered his voice. "I remember you," he whispered. "And I'm not letting you walk out of here unprotected." His words slipped into the cracks of my fear like light. Small, golden, impossible to ignore. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't terror. I felt the beginning of hope. The hospital room felt impossibly quiet after Evan left, but it was a different kind of quiet. No longer the suffocating hush of fear, but a cautious, trembling space where plans could begin to form. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped in my own home, listening for the sound of his footsteps. I wasn't shrinking into shadows, waiting for the next blow. The walls around me, sterile and white, became strange allies instead of enemies. The doctor returned periodically, checking my vitals, but his visits carried more than medical concern. There was a silent understanding in his gaze, a message woven between words: "You are not alone." We will not let him hurt you again." I clung to that understanding like a lifeline. Within hours, a social worker appeared, a woman with kind eyes and quiet efficiency. She spoke softly, deliberately, knowing that every word I could say carried years of hesitation. Forms were signed, questions asked, but never rushed. She asked about my home, my husband, my friends, and, gently, if I felt safe. I nodded, mostly silent, afraid that even a wrong answer could undo the fragile security I now felt. The doctor, meanwhile, had arranged for evidence to be gathered. Photographs of my injuries, medical notes documenting inconsistencies in Evan's story, and records of my previous visits quietly built a case stronger than any lie could counter. I learned that freedom wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It crept in, stitch by stitch, through paperwork, photographs, and witness testimony. Despite the ongoing fear, I began to feel strength returning. Not the false bravery I had pretended for Evan's sake, but real courage. I could sit upright without flinching. I could answer questions without hesitation. I could breathe again. Small freedoms accumulated like coins in a jar, and the jar was slowly filling. Evan's calls began almost immediately, demanding updates from the nurses, asking if he could see me. Each time, the staff handled him with polite firmness. He tried to talk, to guilt, to manipulate, but the walls of the hospital were stronger than his intimidation. He wasn't aware of the plans forming quietly around him, the web of legal and medical evidence being constructed without his knowledge. In the afternoons, I sat by the window, looking out at the city streets below. I had forgotten the color of sunlight, the warmth of air on my face. I watched people walking freely, arguing sometimes, laughing sometimes, and I realized with an almost shocking clarity that life outside wasn't meant to be terrifying. For years, I had been a prisoner in my own home. Now, I was a guest in a place where people's priority was my survival. One evening, the doctor returned, holding a small folder. He set it on the bedside table and looked at me with calm assurance. "We can help you leave safely," he said. "The police are ready to act. But we'll wait until we have everything in place. He won't see it coming." That's the advantage of preparation. I swallowed hard. My mind swirled with fear and anticipation. Could I really leave him? Could I take the step that might finally end this nightmare? The truth was terrifying, but the lie had already suffocated me. I realized I had nothing left to lose except fear itself. Over the next day, I practiced small acts of independence. I answered the phone alone. I packed a small bag with essentials. I even walked the short hallway of the hospital without a nurse by my side. Each step, each decision, was an act of rebellion, a tiny but potent form of revenge. Not revenge in the way Evan would expect. There would be no fists, no screaming, but revenge in the way that truly mattered, reclaiming my power. I remembered the girl I had been before fear hollowed me out. She had loved, laughed, and dreamed without hesitation. She had hope. She had fire. That girl wasn't dead. She had been buried beneath layers of pain and survival, but she could breathe again. By the time the final arrangements were made, I was ready. My evidence was secure. The police were in place. The social worker and the doctor had created a path to freedom I had only dared to imagine, and I was no longer afraid to take it. The quiet that had filled the room now pulsed with potential. For the first time in years, I understood freedom wasn't a moment. It was a careful, deliberate act. And I was about to act. The morning sunlight crept through the hospital blinds, casting thin lines of light across the room. My bag was packed, my documents ready, my phone hidden safely in a nurse's desk drawer. Everything was in place, though my heart thudded with the rhythm of nerves and anticipation. Today was the day. Today I would reclaim everything he had tried to take from me, my dignity, my freedom, my life. Even called first thing in the morning, his voice a mixture of fake concern and simmering irritation. "Why didn't you answer my messages?" he demanded, though the nurses calmly informed him I was unavailable. His tone shifted quickly when he realized I couldn't be manipulated here. Frustration leaked into anger, the familiar mask of dominance slipping. He was losing control, and it showed. I lay in the bed pretending to sleep while the staff quietly prepared. The social worker arrived, giving me a nod. She had been my silent partner in this plan, orchestrating every step so Evan would never anticipate what was coming. In a few short hours, he would realize that his power was gone. Then the doctor entered, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp with determination. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded, my fingers gripping the blanket tightly. There was no turning back now. Security officers were stationed discreetly in the hallways. They wouldn't need to intervene unless he tried something drastic. But they were there, a silent shield. I felt the strength of their presence as though it had seeped into my bones. The moment came when Evan arrived at the hospital, insisting on seeing me. He pushed past the reception without realizing the quiet trap that had been set. The moment he stepped into the room, the doctor's calm authority filled the space. "Ivan," the doctor said, his tone neutral but firm, "we need to discuss the injuries sustained by your wife. We have photographic evidence, previous medical records, and statements from the social worker. These injuries are consistent with domestic abuse, not an accidental fall." Ivan froze. For the first time, the world around him didn't bend to his anger. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if the words themselves were swallowed by the gravity of the situation. I spoke, my voice steady but carrying all the emotion I had buried for years. "I was never clumsy. I was never careless. Every bruise, every scar was caused by you. Every day, you decided to hurt me because it made you feel strong. Not because of me. Because of you." He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. He saw the fear that once defined me replaced with clarity, with calm fury. The security officers moved subtly to block the exits. The social worker holding the phone to record everything, the doctor quietly coordinating with the police who were already on their way. He realized, at last, that this was not a threat I could be coaxed or bullied out of. This was truth. Evan's face twisted from disbelief to rage, but it was too late. The law, witnesses, and irrefutable medical evidence had trapped him. He could yell, he could plead, but no one would listen. Not anymore. When the officers finally escorted him from the room, he looked back once, half anger, half fear. But I didn't flinch. I had nothing to hide. I had nothing to apologize for. The room felt impossibly quiet again, but this time it was the quiet of victory. I sank into the bed, feeling every tense muscle slowly release. Tears flowed freely, unashamed and unafraid. Every drop carried the weight of years of pain. Every breath I took was a reclaiming of my body, my life, my soul. For the first time in years, I could imagine the future. Not the shadow of a man's rage, but the light of my own choices. I didn't need revenge in the form of cruelty. Life itself was sweeter now that he no longer had a place in it. Every moment ahead was mine. Every sunrise, every laugh, every small joy belonged to me, and I would savor it. For the first time, I was free.